You're listening to the Savoir Faire Audio Experience.
Are you ready?
The Savoir Faire Experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Savoir Faire Audio Experience. Thank you guys for listening, following, and sharing. We really appreciate you. Thanks for engaging. Again, another great interview coming at you today, and I'm super excited. It's Monday morning, and the first thing we get to talk about is music, and I love that. So Jade Devitt is here. How you doing, Jade?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you finding some time to connect and chat with me. Jade is the band creator at Gale Forces. You guys definitely need to go check out their music. They just released a new song called Exits, and I was jamming to this morning, man. It was on my playlist this morning when I was having breakfast and trying to wake up. Like, Exits is just as good as my morning coffee. I was just like ready to rock.
Extra juice. I love it.
Yeah, but very, very cool. So I want to learn a lot about you, man, because I know besides the band projects, you've been doing a ton of stuff in life with music. And so one of the big things I like to do when I have musical artists is just kind of start building a little bit of a timeline. And so I'm really curious about younger years and how music became part of your world, if you could take us back that far.
Yeah. So, I kind of started really connecting with music, beyond listening to the radio and, buying heavy metal cassettes when I was like 12, when I got turned on to skateboarding and skateboarding culture and kind of punk rock. That sort of just tore the lid off my whole existence. And I ended up having a stepbrother and stepsister that kind of indoctrinated me into punk rock and to skateboarding. And then I soon sort of discovered this whole subculture in my hometown that I hadn't known about, and that there was local bands that were really amazing. And there was these sort of touring punk bands that were kind of coming through on a very kind of DIY circuit. And it was just amazing. Some of the first shows I saw when I was like 15 were like Scream, when Dave Grohl was the drummer of Scream. And there was also a local band called Diddley Squat, and the bass player of that band was Nate Mendel, who is now in the Foo Fighters. So I sort of, some of the first shows I saw were, ended up kind of being these formative lessons for me, and we had this great, vibrant music scene. Lots of touring bands like Detroitin and touch and go bands, Discord bands from DC like Fugazi that I interviewed on their first tour when I had like a fanzine. So I was just totally immersed in that kind of punk rock world and skateboarding. And then I kind of stumbled upon the drums as my first instrument, because my stepdad was also a drummer. And so I had all this sort of influence when I was 14 or 15. There was a drum set in the house. I had a stepsister who was getting me into like GBH and Nina Hagen and Minor Threat, and a stepbrother that was totally into skateboarding. So it's just kind of really that as the basis for my musical sort of start, and I kind of learned from those local people that were older, these great musicians. My hometown where I grew up in Tri-Cities, Washington, ended up having a lot of musicians who ended up doing great things, like Mark Watrous grew up there, who was in the Shins and plays with Jack White. Nate Mendel, who's in the Foo Fighters. And then our drummer, Isaac, who just left our band to join Guns N' Roses. So it was sort of this great silver lining to kind of growing up in a little bit of a redneck town where you've got this sort of music scene that was sort of really vibrant from like the mid 80s all the way until kind of the early 2000s. And so I kind of came up in that musical world, and we all kind of really supported each other. And then that led to a migration to Seattle. I lived in Seattle in the 90s and kind of cut my teeth. And I was in a band called Engine Kid as the drummer. And then later in a band called Lucky Me, where I was the drummer, and we ended up getting a major label deal with Warner Brothers. And then I took a huge absence from music and then came back to it on guitar and vocals. And that was the start of Gale Forces.
Okay, cool. So is your main instrument drums, or you kind of just all of it is just exciting for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think drums is the instrument that I played first and probably I'm most proficient at. But I always sort of wanted to sing and play guitar and write songs. And so after I took a long break from music, I came back at it from, a different instrumentation and more of a songwriter approach as opposed to an accompaniment, which is, kind of what the drums are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of been the evolution of my musicianship.
Yeah, very cool, man. I love that. Well, I'm a guitar player myself too, so I can appreciate you kind of falling into that role a little bit and taking on that for the new band. I want to talk about creative inspiration and just kind of the idea of this, because I think that musicians in general are very, very creative people. And when you're putting a band together and kind of putting all this stuff together, I think it's a very unique kind of skill set to be able to find the right people, to play the right instruments, to come up with a name that really stands out, be able to have some real skill and something that kind of like makes you stand out within the genre or in the industry that you're in as well too. So talk to me a little bit about Gale Forces. What's the band name represent? And then tell me about the other members of the band and how you guys all met.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gale Forces was actually a nickname that a bandmate gave to me back in the late 90s, because at that time, a 26-year-old that was just all he wanted to do was be successful in music and wanting it to happen right now. I was a really moody guy. And so my bandmate at the time, this guy named Robbie Williamson, that was his nickname for me, Gale Forces, because my moods would swing. And so, a few years later, when I was kind of doing the project and you sort of searching for a name, I just thought that was funny, because it was like, it's a little tongue in cheek, Gale Forces. And it just kind of exudes a kind of, it has some action to the name.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of based on a nickname.
Okay, very cool. And so, and the band members and stuff, and how you guys all met, were you like high school buddies that knew each other forever? Like, was this all kind of a Seattle or a Washington State kind of group of guys?
Kind of how it evolved is, I did a project with Gabe Van Benschoten, who's the guitar player for Gale Forces and co-writer. When I was recording a project with him that he produced back in 2017, where I was playing drums. It was a project with Greg Anderson from Sun and Engine Kid, old-time bandmate, and we were doing a project with Gabe, and Gabe and I really hit it off. We found that we had all this musical connection and all these sort of matching influences. So Gabe was a big catalyst into kind of the band pivoting from just kind of a solo project of mine, where I could just grab whoever wanted to play live into a more collaborative band. And Gabe was the singer and songwriter for a band called Mossbreaker. He's also very connected to the band Failure, and has kind of toured with them in the past as a tech. So that was really kind of the game changer, because he's a producer and he records all our music, and we collaborate. And then the next sort of X factor was bringing Isaac Carpenter in, who, like I said, is now the drummer of Guns N' Roses, but he was in this band called Loudermilk, which were signed back in the early 2000s. He's also been the drummer of AWOL Nation for about 10 years. And Isaac and I grew up together. We grew up in the same small town. And Isaac's parents actually were they had a music store when I was a teenager, and my first musical equipment I bought was from his parents. So Isaac and I go way back. We actually played a show in the 90s where my band played and his band played, and I think he was 12 years old and I was 20, and we were opening for Sunny Day Real Estate. So that was the first time we kind of connected them, and we just became deeper friends over the years, all coming from a small town and kind of having this sort of success and leaving our hometown and eventually landing in LA. And I think our sort of long-term musical respect and friendship lended to him joining Gale Forces, maybe not as his primary focus, but as something that he was a contributor and a participant in. And so, that was a great experience to have him come, and he was a huge influence on the music and the songs and Exits in particular. He was very driving force. It's ironic because our drumming styles are very similar, and we kind of have fed off each other over the years. And then to find him, playing with me while I'm switched from drums to guitar has been such an easy transition for us as friends and as bandmates. So So Gabe and Isaac were kind of the big contributors to the last album that we released in 23, and then the last group of singles that we've released, finishing up with the one we just released last Friday, which is Exit.
Okay, cool. I mean, it's very cool to kind of hear some of these stories that you're telling and kind of letting us into your world, because like, your childhood into your early 20s and things like that, you've really just kind of seen some really cool stuff, like artists that became like really strong artists that we all kind of recognize today in these different bands that you were mentioning, like to see those people kind of come up and have that as kind of a role model situation, or even setting the bar a little high so you can compete with some of that stuff. I love that concept and that idea. That's super cool. The inspiration part of it, I love too. And it's always good to be surrounded by like really strong musicians. And I'm hearing you talk about Isaac and like, growing up in the same small town. And it just reminds me that like, here in my small town where I grew up too, there was a local music store, and everyone that worked at the music store, 5 guys that I went to high school with, they were all in bands or played together or something. So I think that's just a thing. It just happens that way. But I hosted, like when I was like a teenager, I hosted a Battle of the Bands competition, and I clearly remember like a lot of these guys really kind of being a part of it. And some of those guys have gone on to have some really great musical careers. So it's really kind of cool to see the evolution of something like that, from small town to something, and then to be able to launch on a huge platform like that. So yeah, congrats to Isaac, by the way. A little shout out for the Guns N' Roses gig. That's really cool. That's definitely my childhood. So that's awesome to hear that he's kind of doing some of that stuff. I want to dive into some writing stuff with you, man, because I know you're an excellent writer on top of a really great musician as well. And I want to talk just a little bit more again about inspiration and kind of how you're creating your writings turning into songs. So when you're kind of like walking through life, or you're hearing stories, talking to people, what are the little tidbits of things that kind of hit you and become potential song lyrics or titles or whatever? And then what's the process with the band from you kind of kicking an idea around to it becoming a finished like Gale Forces song?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think originally it started me just trying to write songs and just see if I can actually do it. And that was sort of the process of like just coming up with some sort of simple guitar part, and then, putting a vocal on it. As it's evolved, the last album we did and we released in 2023, Highlights of Existence, I think I only wrote maybe 2 or 3 songs on guitar on that album. So at the time we had a guitar player named Ryan Rapp, who's been sort of like the guitar tech for Queens of the Stone Age and the Strokes, which is why he left the band, because of those obligations. But Gabe and Ryan had sort of written all these musical pieces that we ended up kind of arranging together with Isaac. And so that batch of songs was, I was kind of playing to that music and kind of fitting vocals and melodies that sort of resonated with the vibe of the guitar parts. So that's kind of one way that we write. The other way is if I just have something from scratch and I just kind of build it top to bottom. And that's kind of what Exits was. It was just sort of like I had this riff and I kind of had the whole arrangement. And then the band kind of fine-tuned it. So it kind of works from song to song. And certainly I'll take little bits of inspiration from, what's going on in the world. With Exits, it's sort of a fantastical, whimsical daydream of a set of lyrics. It's like, it's kind of imagined, in my mind, it was sort of like, kind of influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey, when, sort of the guys are on the ship and they're working on the ship, and Hal kind of releases them into the ether and essentially murders them. But Exits kind of imagines like a time when our civilization has adapted and we were having, all these space colonies, and it becomes a job for these guys to be techs on some machine, some spaceship, and they're sort of, it's mundane at this point. It's all the luster of space travel is kind of worn out, and maybe these guys are a little bit of slackers. So I know that's kind of a wild daydream, but like sometimes that's the basis for lyrics. And I'm sort of building this loose narrative around something that is kind of a daydream, and maybe it doesn't always translate to the listener as something that's really easy to understand, like a classic song. But it's meant to be a departure. It's meant to be a little bit of an escape, and maybe, meant to be a little bit humorous. We did a song last year called Last Man Under the Moon. And that song was completely inspired by just me going to the desert for a week on a solo music trip. I actually stayed at my friend Nate's house, who's in the Foo Fighters, and he let me kind of stay at his desert cabin for a week. And I was just completely influenced by being out under the moon all by myself, kind of in this remote area, surrounded by crazy birds and coyotes, and just sort of imagines this time before technology, when we just survived off of our sheer will and survival, and kind of celebrating that sort of prehistoric man. So the lyrics can be a little whimsical. The songwriting inspiration can kind of come from different areas and different thought patterns, but I try not to put any kind of limitations or set ideas on, what I'm going to be singing about or what the band is about. The band is meant to be sort of an escape for us, and also meant to be a little bit whimsical, but at the same time, we want the music to be heavy, and we want it to kind of slam and kind of deliver, and there's sort of an athleticism with the drumming and the riffs. So that's kind of been the direction of the band, is sort of like these aggressive, syncopated, angular kind of riffs that really kind of pay off and feel energetic and fun, with this sort of whimsical, sort of half-baked inspiration on the lyrics.
Yeah, no, I dig that, man. That's really cool, and thanks for jumping on a little bit of a rabbit hole there with Exits and some of the other jams that you guys have written, which is super cool. In the very beginning, I'm thinking like from my perspective too, I do writing and play as well, so it's really kind of a process, and I love to hear about other people's process and how they kind of come to getting that finished song, because mine's really simple most of the time. Just kind of sit on the couch or something, turn everything off. There's no distractions. I'm just kind of strumming a guitar and hanging out. I have an acoustic like literally right by my couch. It's just available all the time. And so when the mood strikes, I just kind of start strumming, and then there's a hum that comes with like trying to hum out what potential words might be happening here, and then eventually something actually does come out, and then it's pen to paper, or I grab my laptop, and all of a sudden I'm off to the races. So I'm curious to see how people do that. There's a lot of people that just kind of write the words first, and then obviously you have the access to the band and some really great musicians, so it's easy to take lyrics to somebody and say, okay, let's bring this to life now. And then stuff kind of layers up behind that. So that's why I was kind of curious about the beginning stages of, how you're writing. I feel like you're a lot more poetic than most people too. Like there's a really kind of cool kind of vibe to the lyrics that you guys are writing, or at least that you're writing, that aren't like really, like you said, they're not really like, they don't really stay in a box, I guess, right? Like it's just, there's little storylines that kind of take you different places throughout the song.
Yeah, I think so. I think as far as the process, like probably 9 times out of 10, it just starts with a guitar riff and kind of a shape, maybe an A part and a B part. And then most of the time I let the music kind of tell me what the lyrics should be about. And, sometimes that's spontaneous, and sometimes it's really kind of thought over, like, oh, this is this kind of vibe. Like, okay, this is like 2 dudes in space, or this is like a prehistoric guy. Or we had a couple songs on our last album. One was called Sailors, and it's sort of all about these Antarctic explorers from 1950. It's very specific, but it sort of dives into what their daily lives must have been like. What is the inspiration to do some crazy thing like crossing the Antarctic? We had another song called Highlights of Existence on our last album, which is really just inspired by all the polarization in our country and how we can't seem to get along with our relatives anymore because we're so divided, and trying to appeal to like our better angels, and like, where can we come together? So it is kind of all over the place. There's not really a specific direction, but it's meant to be sort of touching something deeper, like we're telling a story, but what are we really saying? What are we saying is like, with a certain song might be like this need for connection that we all need, or, what is this fantastical inspiration for crazy men that do crazy things, so there's always some sort of point to the story or the point to the lyrics, even if it's a little abstract. It's meant to evoke an emotion that is a little deeper. So I appreciate you saying poetic, because I guess that's probably a consequence that I don't hate. That it has a poetic, it has a poetic quality to it, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do, right? The best art and the best music makes you feel something.
Right.
And, that's not always the easiest thing to do. And sometimes we stumble upon it, and, we're happy for those happy accidents.
Yeah, what I like about what you're saying too, Jade, is like, this is kind of unique perspective from my musical background, I guess, is that I feel like a lot of writers, bands, whatever, they really try to start creating stuff that's very commercialized, right? It's just for, I want to write something that's going to be for everybody. We want everyone to listen to it. It's that kind of thing. You don't talk like that, which is great. I mean, it sounds like you guys really kind of write what's meant for Gale Forces, or this other persona of you, since it's your nickname. Just this idea of like these songs that are built for, well, if they love us, they love us. If they don't, that's okay. And I dig that so much, like with kind of being more original, the poetic aspect of being able to write, kind of having lyrics that kind of touch base in different places. It's cool to hear your perspective on that too, because when I listen to Exits, I obviously hear a total different message than what you are talking about when you wrote the song, obviously, and what you know what I mean. So I love that idea, because that's the part where it's like super unique to you guys, but it's still going to connect with audiences in a different way, because everyone's picking up on different pieces of what this storyline might be. And I really kind of dig that. I think that's a super cool way to write and be creative and kind of reach people in a different way than just saying, yeah, we wrote a song about a breakup, because everyone deals with breakups, right? Like, you're talking about aliens and being the last man under the moon and writing from the desert. And like, I love that aspect. It's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think so many of the famous songs that we all grew up on and still love, it's like, it's like you can kind of interpret it different ways, and people put their own memories and their thoughts and attach it to music, so it's like, I do like, the aspect of the lyrics and the vibe being kind of open-ended and open to interpretation, because that's when you really bond with music. It's like there's something catching you, there's something in your life and your past that is connecting to the message. It's like, obviously there's songs where it's like it's really cut and dry, and they're talking about love or something like that, and you can connect your own thing with that. But I like things to have an open interpretation. So I like that you're kind of hearing something different than maybe was the origination of some of the lyrics, like for Exits. Like I like that, because people can kind of put their own thing over it.
Yeah, I think it's just different walks of life, different perspective. Everyone's hearing something a little bit different. The storyline kind of hits a little differently than the creative aspect, which is one of the big reasons why I like to not only interview the artist, but really just kind of find out, okay, what was going on when you wrote this song? Like, so we can get a perspective of what the storyline is supposed to be. And then I can compare it later to what I actually heard myself. And I think that's super unique and cool. Well, I want to give a little bit of shout out time here. So Gale Forces, you guys are on Instagram. I found you under Gale Forces on Instagram. You have some other social accounts, I'm assuming. But can people see you guys live this summer? Where are you going to be at? What's going on?
Yeah, we just played a show Saturday downtown at the Redwood Bar in LA. We have a couple other shows we're trying to finalize. I think one is going to be July in Hollywood at Harvard and Stone. But we don't have a ton of stuff booked. We did just get a new drummer after Isaac left. So we're going to have more opportunities, and are planning to play a lot more shows around LA, and eventually, this year or next, try to get up the West Coast for like a West Coast tour.
Yeah, that sounds legit. So is this summer going to be kind of just a transitional period, writing some new music, just kind of focusing on getting some things out there?
Yeah, I think we'll probably try to play a lot more live shows now that the lineup is a little more solidified again. And then, definitely start writing some more songs. I think sometimes our best writing comes when we just all get in a room and somebody, starts laying down a drum beat, and then somebody has a riff. And then we've written songs like that before where, I might just sort of let it free associate on the lyrics. And sometimes we have songs where it's like we keep 70% of just what came out of my mouth, like on the fly. So yeah. I anticipate we're going to start writing some more songs like that. certain songs, because of everybody's schedule and, our last album through the pandemic, sometimes songs take a lot longer to finish than we hope. And Exits was one of those where we kind of worked on it and rearranged the arrangement a few times. But I anticipate with now Dylan as our new drummer, Dylan Howard. I think he also plays with Juliette Lewis and the Licks and Ages, and he's got some different bands that he plays for as well. But now that we have him in the fold, I anticipate that we'll start kind of collaborating and recording in a faster manner, where we just kind of get together and kind of let it rip, and kind of start moving into a writing process where maybe it's a little less precious, and we're not obsessing over a certain arrangement or the quality of the guitar, and we might just kind of have a more raw quality, because everybody's talented, and everybody knows their instrument, and our new drummer Dylan, certainly has all this acumen and has the sort of energetic necessity that we need for our style of music. Like, he's able to provide that sort of athletic, dynamic thing, which is so important for like a heavy rock band. So that'll be kind of our next step, and then trying to kind of do some more shows this summer and fall, so we can eventually kind of get bigger shows and start to play with bigger bands.
Yeah, it makes sense, man. Well, very cool. I definitely appreciate you taking some time out of your Monday to hang out with me, talk a little bit about music and the band. Again, it's Gale Forces on Instagram. Go find their new video on YouTube, Exits by Gale Forces. Very, very cool song. Definitely appreciate the time. Yeah, man, I'm really excited to see kind of where all this goes, and I'm gonna be a follower. I want to see what's kind of happening in like a year from now, what's happening with the changes you guys are doing. So that's really cool.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate the time, and love that you appreciate the song, and we're gonna keep it going here.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.